Okay, well, I think we'll get started. Welcome to this webinar, which we are running in collaboration with Voice 21 today. So the title of our webinar, as you know, is Making the Connection Between Oracy and Reading. Welcome to everybody. I am recording this. I hope that's okay with everyone. My name is Nicola Romaine and I'm Primary Literacy Advisor at Pearson. And I'm joined here today by three absolute experts in the field of Oracy. And you'll be hearing a little bit more from them in a moment. So we have with us today Kathleen McBride, who is Senior Learning and Innovation Lead at Voice 21. And we have Krista Greenwood, who is English Coordinator at St Mary C of E Primary School in Surrey. And Sophie Housam, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Sophie, please correct me, because this is an Oracy webinar. And Sophie is Assistant Head Teacher at Allerton C of E Primary in Leeds. So welcome to the three of you. Thank you ever so much for joining us today and agreeing to be part of this panel. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. The purpose of this webinar for participants is that they gain a better understanding of the Oracy landscape on the ground and are able to take away some really practical tips and ideas around resources and that kind of thing, so that they can take that back to their own practice. So as we all know, Oracy is a very hot topic at the moment. It's widely acknowledged that high quality classroom talk is essential to pupils' thinking and learning, and it's also linked to improvements in reading and writing and overall attainment. There is a drive to ensure that the deliberate, explicit and systematic teaching of Oracy across all phases throughout the curriculum is embedded. At Pearson, we're also committed to improving the Oracy skills of all pupils, and we've established a set of principles which you can see on the slide in front of you, which are that Oracy is for everyone and that every child should be given opportunities to have their voice heard, to develop the skills needed to express themselves. And that from educators to parents to resource providers, everyone has a part to play in helping children to develop their oral language skills. That Oracy should be embedded within the curriculum and is key to children's confidence and well-being. And that Oracy can unlock reading, writing and a broader vocabulary, and that talking is an essential part of these processes. So they're just our own key Oracy principles here at Pearson. We do have a Oracy webpage, which I will share with you at the end of this webinar. And please do go and explore and have a look at what we have on there, if you so wish. This webinar, as I said, is being recorded, and we will send you the recording as a follow-up to the webinar itself in an email. We do have a number of questions that participants of this webinar have sent to us. So first of all, we're going to have some insight into the practice and expertise and experience of our three panelists. And then as a follow-up, we will go through those questions and our panelists will then answer those questions for you and provide some insight into what their and how their expertise aligns to that. So I'm going to start by asking Krista, could you expand on your role, Krista, and your experience in the field of Oracy?
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Krista Greenwood. I am an English lead at a large primary school in Surrey. We're 2 form entry at infant and then 4 form entry at junior, and have children joining us from other local infant schools. I also work as a teaching and learning advisor for a Surrey-based organization called SAFE, which stands for the Schools Alliance for Excellence. That is probably where I have most expanded my understanding of Oracy, because as part of my work training other English leads, I suddenly needed to learn an awful lot. And actually things collided really well for me at what I think is exactly the right time. So one of Surrey's big issues is actually, Surrey is a high achieving county. Our results look really good. If you look comparatively around the country, they look great. We do great. But our disadvantaged pupils do not. Our disadvantaged pupils are in the tank, frankly. Their results are way worse comparatively. And so one of the things we work on really hard with schools is how do we close that gap? And other schools do it really well. And through all of that work, we started looking at how do we improve things for underserved pupils? And that led into a journey about self-efficacy and supporting children, and coming to how do we give children a voice? And some children don't have a voice in school, and they don't have self-belief in themselves. And that then came back around to my own school. So my own school is one of those schools. We're in Leafy, Surrey. We have lots of children who actually speak very well and are well supported at home, come from what Ruth Miskin would call a talk a lot family, and so they're doing really well, but other children who don't. And so this coming year, actually, our school's sort of overarching theme, which will be linked to our key priorities, is every child has a voice. And so my research that I was doing through my other job, where I train teachers, suddenly came to the forefront. And me and my deputy head here have been working really hard on putting that together. And in the end, we had a meeting with Voice 21. And although I sort of thought I might be able to do this myself, because I've done a lot of research and worked really hard, we have actually signed on with Voice 21 for a year of work, for which I'm very excited. So I'm not sure I'd actually call myself an Oracy expert, but I have a lot to say passionately about it, and a lot of it is research backed. My first actually port of call was Voice 21. Even without signing up, Voice 21 have a lot to offer on their website. I've also done a lot of reading through the EEF webinars, various other things, and the work of Jean Gross. I would really recommend, if you're looking for something to read anything she's written, especially, and this isn't just about Oracy, but Reaching the Unseen Children is a fantastic book that links really well. I think that is everything I want to say to start with. Oracy in my own school is really still on a journey, so I can't use my own school as an example of how we've embedded it really well. But I have done a lot of my own training and working with other teachers, so I've got plenty of things to say I'd kind of like to hang on to, because they match well with our questions for later.
Thank you so much, Krista, and really interesting to hear what you say about Surrey, and the fact that the children in your school, you have that gap. So and you're looking to close that disadvantage gap as well, which is obviously what we're really focusing on. Thank you very much. I'm just going to hand over to Sophie. Hi, Sophie.
Hello, hi. I'm Sophie Housam. I am the assistant head at my school in Leeds in Yorkshire. We are a 3-form entry school with nearly a half of children EAL. So there is a big focus on Oracy and how we support those children who enter in nursery and reception, but also might enter halfway through their primary school year, or even, year 5 and 6. So I lead writing in school, but I have led reading and writing, and undertaken a reading research project on how to support and bridge the gap with pupil premium. So I'm not an expert like Voice 21, but I've got a lot of things that I do in my class. So I teach year 4, but I've taught from reception up to year 6 as well. So a lot of things that I have implemented in my school, and also I support ECTs and coach in school. And one area of my coaching with reception in year 1 at the minute is how to support the Oracy and have really high expectations on participation in classrooms around that. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Sophie. And providing a contrast there to Krista's own school, actually, which is great, but it just kind of adds to the picture that Oracy's for everybody, I think, and how all teachers and all schools can really take advantage of the content of this webinar and your experiences to really help their own practice. And over to you, Kathleen.
Thank you. Hi everybody. Nice to be here. So I'm Kathleen. I work in our research and impact department. I've worked with Voice 21 for about 6 years now. So I joined when it was quite early on in our sort of growth and development of the organisation. I came from a teaching background. So prior to working for Voice 21, I was an English teacher in sixth forms and FE colleges. So really interesting to be involved in this discussion today around early reading. So although my teaching experience was, much further up the age range, still some really interesting connections between some of the barriers to reading and the ways in which Oracy unlocked that for older students as well as younger. I think we'll go into this a bit in some of our questions. But in my role with Voice 21, I've been involved in a number of projects. So we worked a couple of years ago with Speech and Language UK on a collaboration around best Oracy practice in the early years and Key Stage 1. So that was a really interesting project that gave us lots of insights into the capacity of Oracy to really support that universal high quality teaching. And again, we'll go into some more of this later on, but helping to kind of identify need as well. More recently, I've been doing a lot of work in maths, which isn't really connected to today's webinar, but
definitely
I mean,
connected
really,
to Oracy though, isn't it?
absolutely connect. Yes, indeed. Yeah, and those kind of really foundation literacy skills that also are so crucial to early numeracy as well. And our recent voice and vocabulary project, I think, is quite relevant to what we'll be discussing today about developing and advocating an Oracy rich approach to vocabulary acquisition. So I'm sure we'll unpack some of that as well throughout today's webinar. So essentially I get to do lots of really juicy projects around Oracy and understanding how it supports teachers and students in lots of different contexts.
That's great. Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks to the three of you actually for providing that introduction to your own work and your own experience. I think we can probably crack on with these questions, really. I'm going to move on. We've had quite a few questions come through from participants, but I've kind of tried to summarise them here on this slide. So what we're going to do is I will work through them, and our fantastic panellists are going to provide some answers to those questions. So first one is around why is it so important for children to have that strong foundation in communication, language and literacy skills for phonics and reading proficiency? So we hear all about this, we know that there's a massive drive, but why is that, and what is the impact on children's reading development right from the very beginning? I think I'm going to turn to you, Kathleen, to sort of kick off with the answer to this question, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to get started, and then for people to jump in and
chip in.
to build as we go through. But there's lots and lots of research around, it's not even particularly new research, but that supports the idea that spoken language skills really precede reading skills, and that the sort of those pre-reading skills are really grounded in Oracy practice. We know that spoken language becomes a really core mechanism for unlocking those later reading proficiencies that children need to develop in order to then become confident and fluent readers. So whether that's their ability to recognise sounds and sound patterns, and then to further down the line connect those sound patterns with printed alphabetic systems and so on. And at some point you get this convergence of speech and print, and that kind of is where the early reading skills develop. But there's so much input and learning that takes place before students, even children, I call them students because I'm used to working with older students, but children get to that point. And so many of those pre-reading skills involve rich dialogue, high quality back and forth interaction. A lot of the skills inherent in that really rich back and forth between adults and children are those skills that will later support students with comprehension, such as kind of summarizing skills, clarification, and so on. So there's so much that we can achieve through spoken language for most students that supports that early literacy.
That's great. And we see that coming through in the reading framework guidance, don't we? That kind of real focus on the importance of that early establishment of back and forth talk and discussion. Sorry, I've gone forwards to one of your slides there. Sorry, Sophie. Krista, have you anything to add to that kind of emphasis on that importance of the strong foundation in communication early on?
I mean, I've thought this about 7 times already in our pre-discussion and just in the introductions, and it is probably just goes without saying, but I don't know why any of us or anyone believes that children are going to be able to read it or write it if they can't first say it. Like that's got to be the beginning point, right? So we want them to do all these things, and it should be grounded in talk first, and especially because frankly when they come to school they can't read and they can't write, and they're not going to be able to do those things instantly. So for every single child, even the ones who've come in more advanced and ready for those next steps, the talk is going to be where the richest thing is happening, because EYFS don't read and write, right? They don't do that already. So that is where we need to start. And I know we come later to this question about educators, but it's making sure that educators know the right things to say in order to channel that talk, and that we are setting up children to do that, and that we're not allowing, closing them off. You can see examples of how adults do it, how they close off what children are going to say instead of expanding it. I was going to talk about later, Jean Gross talks about something called the hand rule, where it's one question for four more things. I can show that later, or not show it, but I've got it I've written down notes and got pages and books and things. But I thought it's a brilliant way of talking about how you expand what children are saying, and how they need that language. If they haven't got the language, and it doesn't matter how well we then do with the phonics, they're not going to understand what they read. So there's all that to follow on.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you, Krista. And I guess with your work with the early career teachers as well, Sophie, that is a great emphasis as well. But that kind of making it clear and really sort of that coaching around what that early open talk looks like, so that you're not closing them off, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really important when we strip it down to the basics as well, to think about the use of teaching assistants in the early years provision, and that we have to remember that they need high quality training. And although it seems really simple, we all need to be modelling speaking in full sentences and identifying the vocabulary that we really want to pick out, and finding synonyms as well. So people, they often think it's the adjectives that we really need to look at and we need to have an emphasis on, but verbs in the early years and synonyms of different verbs are so important, that there needs to be that structure for people who maybe don't naturally mince around with different types of verbs. For jump, can we give teachers and teaching assistants the tools they need so that they can model it? And I've seen some really effective practice this year in early years where the teacher is just so articulate and they have the highest expectations on questions from children, and just not settling for a one-word answer or a phrase, even to go to the toilet. And I see now, in further up school, that if that high expectation around those full sentences hasn't been modelled or talked about, then children might still, particularly those who are EAL, just say, can I toilet? Or, can I go toilet? Because it starts right, in that early years.
Yeah.
I might talk about the colourful semantics on the fourth point, Nicola, so we'll
come back to that then. That's great. Thank you. Thank you to the three of you. And I think that leads really well from that kind of starting point of the importance of early oral language to talking about words and vocabulary, which is our second question there. So that's around what the potential consequences of children lacking the necessary vocabulary and communication skills are when they start school. And I'm sure that all of us can think immediately about what those are, but just to expand a little bit and just to absolutely quantify that, I don't know who to hand over to. Shall I hand over to you, Kathleen, again, being she went first this time?
Really happy to jump in here. So I guess this is where actually my post-16 context is quite useful for this conversation, because I think the consequences of not attending to students' language development really explicitly and purposely is that when they reach further education, I'm just thinking my last teaching job was in a FE college, and the students were teaching were resitting their GCSE English, and they came to that context with really negative experiences of school, with lots of opting out of school, etc. And it's just kind of tracing that right back perhaps to those early beginnings, where is it the case that creating those really talk-rich, inclusive, supportive environments that really attend to that language development could support students in the longer term. There's lots of research that talks about the ways in which the differences in which the vocabulary that children present with in reception are exacerbated as they move through key stages and they encounter various standardized testing, at key stage 2 or key stage 4. So we do see those differences grow. So I guess the consequence of not attending to children's language development is that those challenges are exacerbated. They don't fix themselves necessarily. So it really is the responsibility of educators to look for the ways in which we can provide the right conditions and the right environment and the right support for all children to flourish in their language development. And I think one thing that I'm really mindful of is that we hear a lot that children arrive in reception with below age-related expectations in language and communication skills. And I think there's such a whole host of reasons for that. And it's important not to kind of, I think, view that through a deficit lens. It's kind of looking at, well, some children will be new to English, some children will be from families where maybe there isn't a lot of talk for one reason or another. Some children may have a yet to be diagnosed speech, language and communication needs. So there's this whole myriad of reasons why students will be at different levels. But the consequences of not attending to that is that those challenges worsen over time if not attended to.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. And that kind of really speaks strongly to what, Sophie, you were saying previous to this question around the really intentional kind of focus on that really early on, and even with your early career teachers, and really stripping back the children's kind of speaking in full sentences, and that expectation, I think, and I think it boils down to that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say as well that it's the way that we kind of sensitively handle that in a way that doesn't discourage children from speaking, particularly, when thinking about that question 5. But how do you do it in a tactful way where you might repeat what they say, but repeat it in a full sentence, and then encourage them to say it a second time? And celebrate that if you know that they're struggling with that, but not in a way that is that can put them down if they can't structure those sentences.
Because there's lots of examples, aren't there, of building on what they say so that you're showing them the right way and expanding, which is almost praising their idea without so you can do that correcting, but you haven't brought them down, as rather than saying it isn't, not ain't, not doing that kind of correcting of the language in that way that might bring them down.
Because I think really we need to consider the consequences of doing it wrongly as well, don't we? Of taking the wrong approach, and as you say, Krista, bringing them down or correcting them when we shouldn't be doing that. So I suppose we have to be kind of mindful of our approach in that respect as well. Thank you to the three of you. I want to move us on, if that's okay, to question 3, and this is around that educator support. So you touched, Sophie, on your work with early careers teachers, so that's obviously going to then have that kind of impact into the future in schools and teachers, and all of this work that we're doing now and addressing this issue now is going to have an impact on those children as they grow older. And as you spoke about the older children there, Kathleen, and hopefully we'll see fewer children coming through into key stage 3 and key stage 4 with these issues if we address this now, or continue to address this now. But question 3 around how can educators support those children's language acquisition and their literacy development through that explicit and scaffolded instruction. So I don't know who wants to go next, who'd like to chip in and talk about what we can do to support teachers and schools right now.
I've got a variety of things. I'm sure that some of you got the same or things to chip in. So the first thing I wrote in my notes was about sentence stems and having sentence stems available for teachers and children so that we can support children in how we want them to respond to questions. So if we want a child to speak like a geographer or speak like a scientist or use the language of persuasion or the language of explanation, what does that look like? And here's my sentence stem. So the teacher can model that. And then those sentence stems are up in the classroom so that children can refer to them in order to use them. Obviously, they have to be able to read to do that bit. So we're a little bit, but even in the earliest years, they can be there for the staff, right? Yeah. So we're modeling what that looks like. I'd really recommend, and I meant to be able to share the link, and I'm not sure if I can get out of this to do it, but Tower Hamlets have a really great set of sentence stems that are available, and they have them by topic, but also by year. And so they show this gradual development. I feel like Voice 21 probably have something similar on offer. I know that Tower Hamlets have worked really closely with Voice 21, so it might be in conjunction. But I share those all the time with schools who are looking for something, because they could definitely build into the writing as well. But making sure that staff have those tools available in order to do that. And then this kind of comes back to what we were talking about before in supporting teachers and support staff in knowing, like, what language do we use and how do we make sure teachers have the right tools to build on what children are saying and support children. So this is the Jean Gross 5 thing, is the rule of, and I don't know that this is hers, but this is where I've read it, 1 question to 4 other things. And the 4 things are comments, repetitions, expansions, and explanations. So repeating back what the child says, expanding, adding more, commenting on it. It looks like maybe it was this, or explaining it to them. So telling them something extra about the thing they've just told you, so that we're not just continuously fishing with questions where we're hoping children are going to come up with. That's why my favorite thing is when you see a teacher use fishing questions where they keep asking because they're looking for a really specific answer. Just tell them. Yeah. Skip the fishing question. If they're just guessing what you want them to say, just tell them.
Thanks, Krista. That's great. Sophie, I'm going to come to you.
A few things we do. I'm sure it's a lot more sort of structured with yours, Kathleen, but I've seen a lot of lessons lately, just generally, like, where children aren't talking a lot. So, dependent on your experience here, just hands up, very traditional. Personally, I feel there's not a need for that anymore. You want children to be talking as much as possible. Talk partners, numbering them, partner 1 and partner 2. Talk trios. We even do, I've forgotten what they're called, like talk quartets. I don't really know. Talking quads. But talking partners on a basic level, for instance, in year 1, do the pair know who is partner 1, who is partner 2? Repeat each other's idea, just to give another kind of, can they hear it back? What does it sound like back? Then share it with the teacher. The teacher says the idea and then gets the children to repeat it again. So in an activity of 5 minutes, for instance, if you're generating main clause sentences about something, it could be anything, they ping pong ideas between them and both repeat it. Partner 2 repeats partner 1, partner 1 repeats partner 2. Can you think of as many as you can? Here's a timer. The teacher then collates the ideas. That's great. Let's all repeat. For EAL as well, it's just so important that in that 5-minute activity, they may have heard 10 different sentences. If it were a hands-up activity, they might have heard 2 with a lull, a drag, some have tuned out. So any opportunity where there is an idea generation, I do talk partners. And then thinking about the metacognitive side, how can you model that active listening, eye contact, all of these social skills that, are you sure? Are you looking at your partner there as they speak? And then someone's looking out the window, and then, so modeling it with your teaching assistant maybe, which is again, helps the teaching assistant as well. And having those really high expectations on it. So if you've said something and now it's my turn, your turn, a bit like Read, Write, Ink or any sort of system like that, has everybody repeated it? Because often EAL children, like in my class, will just take a back seat and not then repeat it. So stopping and expecting it and then going again. So the high expectations around that and the explicit numbering of partners. And I really love Krista's idea of the what the teacher can offer to build on that. And then one more thing, when you're taking ideas, so let's say you've ping-ponged some idea generation or something like that, and then you want the answers. If you snake round the class to get the answers from each person and their best answer, often as a teacher, you might want them to generate things, but what they've actually thought of is okay, but it's not like to the teacher's like ability. So snake round, ask for answers, but input yours every 3 or every 5. So it is a sort of kind of, I'm going to say, subtle indoctrination of ideas from you, where you are feeding in high quality, but it feels like them. So just another idea for that oracy, but if you give an answer, they have to repeat. So yeah, just some ideas on the scaffolding there.
That's great, Sophie. And I think what comes through there for me is being really purposeful, as an educator, being really purposeful around embedding those skills as well, and embedding the children's own understanding of expectations, and taking your time to really embed that, kind of what number they are and that kind of thing, and the expectations around eye contact and the whole social aspect of it. Thank you. Kathleen, do you have anything to add? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, but I might go on a slightly different tangent, and hopefully it's not completely off piece. But I was just thinking, there's so many helpful examples there from Krista and Sophie. What I think needs to happen at the same time as those really practical strategies is for schools to build a shared understanding around what Oracy is and what it's doing in the classroom, because that's when we can upskill teachers to really identify, I guess, the types of talk that we're asking our children to engage in, and then how those different types of talk elicit different expectations, and then from there we'll need different scaffolds and supports for children as well. So I think almost, and I know teachers really need and kind of make use of strategies, but I think that if that happens in tandem with that kind of broader thinking around, well, what is Oracy, why do we need it in our context, and actually what are the types of talk happening in my classroom, and how do I look at those through the lens of the different skills inherent in different types of talk, and then I know what I'm supporting and why, and what those expectations might be. And it might be that there's opportunities where students, we know they're going to engage in that exploratory talk, and I've got my explicit and embedded routines around that. And then there's the more presentational opportunities. And if you think about that through the lens of early years, there's so many opportunities for both those types of talk, that I think it's important to distinguish what it is we want from students, and then share that with them so that they know what we're looking for, and they've got the scaffolds that we're providing. But also that we create that space for teachers and children to reflect on that talk together as well. I think that's kind of one part of the process. When I was teaching, I definitely didn't do a lot of. And at Voice 21, we always think about a really just such a simple structure of purpose. So the purpose of the talk, how we're going to structure that, whether that's in our pairs or our trios, of our quads has been mentioned. What are the scaffolds for that talk so all children can participate, and then how are we reflecting on that talk so that we're progressing and learning from that experience as well.
Thanks, Kathleen. I think that's really important as well. The fact that we're taking a moment in time, aren't we? We're at a kind of a really sort of crucial moment with this, I think, in the whole landscape, and having that, making sure that we truly understand from why we're doing this, I think is really, really important. Ensuring that all members of staff that are involved, have got an understanding as to why Oracy is important. I'm sure we do that anyway, but I think just kind of like reflecting on that is really important, and having that shared understanding across staff and the children in the school. You sort of nodded to that, Sophie, that they understand as well what the purpose is really the starting point here for any school, I think, before they kind of progress any further. Thank you so much, the three of you. I'm really, really aware of time. I think we could really fill a longer webinar. I feel as though we're just touching the sides really, but I'm going to move on to question 4. And if we don't cover all of these questions fully now, we can absolutely in the follow-up email cover those for you. Anybody who is worried that we're not going to cover their questions. So the 4th question is about structured activities and lessons which can be implemented to enhance vocabulary, oral communication and comprehension skills in children. I'm going to start with you, Sophie, for question 4, because I know you have some visuals to share with us.
Yeah, I'll try and race through as quickly as I can. First thing, the next slide, please, Nicola. Colourful semantics are so useful across the whole of school. We had teachers saying in reception, I enjoy teaching writing, I enjoy the Oracy side, but I don't know, when they get to the end of the year, I feel like I could do more in terms of structuring the talk, which ultimately then, as Kathleen said, turns into the writing. So I thought around it, and these colourful semantics are so helpful and playful with moving around and structuring sentences. So if you just go to the next slide, Nicola, please. Consider maybe, you know, how a progression in this could be really helpful for staff. This is just like a snippet of our progression for early years, but if children aren't forming letters rather than pushing it, how can you use drama and images and things they know about themselves and around them to help them just start with the subject and the verb, and then build on that in terms of you know, the who, the what doing who, and talk about it, play around. If you colour borders with pictures, and this is called widget, you can kind of provide a scaffold then where they can take colours and talk it, and have fun talking it in the past tense, in the present tense. And then as they move on, how could the where or the when be at the start of a sentence? So in the deep dark forest, you know, who might be Red Riding Hood. And it's so fun, and staff have taken really well to this idea, because that early learning goal seems quite difficult at first. But then actually when you strip it down to what this is, it is such a good scaffold to help. I'll race to the next slide. Some ideas for scaffolding in lower key stage 2 and above in upper key stage 2. Vocabulary, you could get so much vocabulary from a unit, either reading or writing, but picking out verbs and nouns that are useful in a model or a class novel, and then you as a teacher generating the synonyms for children, but then having really fun activities around that. So here are 2 mix and match ones where I've got some EAL children in my class who were nowhere near expected in year 3 and are now confidently on track for expected. They've had so many of these scaffolded activities where we generated loads of evil villains' eyes. So you could see like blank, expressionless eyes, and what did they reveal or what did they conceal? And then they can create this whole sentence around his blank, expressionless eyes concealed a lifetime of sin. And so these are such great mix and match activities, so great in terms of reasoning and that oracy of, do you think that works? I'm not too sure. But then also just saying lots of the sentences out loud. She was basking in her own what might work, and then craft the whole sentence again. And then just the next slide, really, really quickly. Just some more, just really high quality vocabulary warm-ups to help. And visualizing what you want to plan or what you want to write about before you even do it. So I talk with my class about being the director, and if you were the director of the film, what would it look like? So they have a whole lesson of talk before they plan to write anything. And everybody has started that in school now, visualizing, drawing. We've got like film, you know, like and scene, those things. And it's just, all of this can help that oracy. We've got 4 minutes.
Oh, no. I just wanted to say, I just absolutely love this vocabulary, and the thought that children that are EAL or wouldn't otherwise be immersed in it, you know, and now able to use it for their writing is amazing. So thanks, Sophie.
Yeah.
Who's gonna go next? Kathleen?
Can I just build on, just because what Sophie was saying there
Yeah.
really chimed with some of the work we've done around vocabulary, and so much of this just looks like really good fun, and that you're tapping into what's going to spark children's curiosity and foster that love of language learning, and it should be a joy, shouldn't it? Learning language and developing that vocabulary. So our Voicing Vocabulary project looked at what the active ingredients might be to an Oracy centric approach to vocabulary development. It wasn't the catchiest title, but it was really considering how do we explicitly plan the vocabulary we want to teach, reduce the amount of vocabulary we're expecting to get through. Often we find that a lot of teachers in that project just completely shifted their focus in terms of quantity and focused instead on developing a love of the language, a depth of learning, the opportunity to encounter words multiple times, not just kind of a single exposure and we're expecting them to retain that, and then just really creative opportunities to play around with the language as they're learning it, but then some really rich talk-based scenarios for them to apply and feel like they've mastered that language as well. So I won't like run through every ingredient that we put in that report, but you can get that free online. It's the Voicing Vocabulary report with that very long title that I said before.
Hopefully we can put a link in the follow-up email as well, Kathleen, to that. I'd love to read that myself. I haven't done, but yeah, it sounds really super interesting. Krista, did you want to say anything about vocabulary before I wrap up?
Well, just, I mean, in my notes, I did have about the importance of explicitly teaching vocabulary, which a lot of people know, but is being careful about which words you're choosing. So rather than just the sort of random word of the day, choosing words that are linking to the text you're teaching in English or your topic, you know, and that we're really cautious about the cognitive overload that's going to come if we think I need to teach them 20 words. Well, they're not going to learn 20 words. If they know one, they're not going to learn 20 in a lesson. So what's most important? What do I teach? And then how do we use that Oracy to rehearse using that word so they actually embed that so more words come. The only other thing I wanted to say is I love all these ideas, Sophie, and especially I assume that one on the end with annoyed at the bottom is that whole concept of all these different words that mean the same, but choosing the one that's the strong, helping children choose the correct word for that moment, right? Am I annoyed or am I livid? And helping them see that. So I love that sort of activity.
Yeah, and choosing the word for the moment and for the mood and for the emotion of the person, I guess, and the context of that word for that person at that time. Thank you so much. We haven't anywhere near to for all of those questions, but I do promise there's going to be a blog as a follow-up to this webinar. So all of those themes in those questions will be we will either cover them in the follow-up email or we will be touching on them in the blog that Kathleen is going to provide for us, and I'm sure that Krista and Sophie will feed into the follow-up as well. Thank you ever so much, the three of you. I feel, as I said before, I feel as if we're just kind of touching the sides on this. Fantastically interesting conversation. And I would just like to thank the participants for joining. Please do visit our Pearson Oracy page, which is evolving actually. So please do visit that, which is Oracy is for everyone, when I send you the follow-up slides. Thanks for joining us, all of you. And as I said, thank you ever so much, Krista, Kathleen and Sophie, for your marvellous input as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
See you all. Bye.